First things first, let's get two very important things out of the way. A big thank you to Shodanon, the lead developer of Peripeteia, for providing me with an early copy of the game. It's an honor to have gotten to play this game early. Thank you so much. And secondly, I have to correct an error that I made in my original Peripeteia video. I mistakenly called Salt the composer of Peripeteia, implying that he was the only composer for the game, when he's a composer for Peripeteia. There are plenty of people working on this project. I apologize for the error. I'll leave a link to their website, where you can find the full list of developers and contributors, as well as their Steam page, since by the time you're seeing this video, the early access should be available for you to purchase. Alright, on to the video. Welcome back to Alternate History Poland, everyone. It's been a couple years since I covered the demo of this game, and now that the early access is being released day of, if not before this video goes up, it's time to give it another look and see how much it's grown. Last time, I praised Peripeteia for its unique approach to gameplay, by which I mean it takes pretty much every modern game convention and throws it out the window. Waypoints? Nah. Map? Nope. Safeguards? Nuh-uh. A clear path with secrets along the way? Well, no to the first one. Hints? Man, in your dreams! Going into this game, you need to forget a lot of muscle memory. This is very much a fuck around and find out kind of game. And I love it. Many games of the past wouldn't shy away from letting the player feel lost. This was, one, because games didn't have as defined formulas as they do now, and two, because you were less likely to complete the game within your Video Easy rental period, so you'd pay more to extend it. But as time went on, games became more mainstream. They had to adapt to people with jobs and other responsibilities, not just teenagers and kids who hopped on after school. So if a game was gonna take forever because it's confusing to progress, those potential customers wouldn't bother buying the game. So, over time, games held your hand a little more and a little more. We got arrows, hints, waypoints, objective menus. Not that any of those mechanics are bad. Personally, I think that the evolution to make games more accessible and efficient on the player's time was a good thing. But in that process, we've left behind the art of the world itself. Games like Skyrim, or Far Cry, and Cyberpunk. They wish they could invoke the feeling of exploration that Peripeteia offers. And Peripeteia isn't even an open world game. Though some of the maps are quite large, the structure is still episodic, so you go from level to level. But those levels don't really feel like they exist for the player. They just exist. As I mentioned before, you're not given a lot of what we've come to expect from modern games. There's no map or waypoints. The only thing you have for directions is your journal, landmarks, and a compass at the top of the screen. So when you're exploring, there is no right path. These maps don't exist for you. You are responsible for getting yourself from A to B. There's so many areas that you end up in and you say to yourself, was I even meant to see this part of the map? Which brings me to something that the game does that I think really shines, and I wish more games did. It lets the player fuck up. And not get a game over, but actually fuck up. You might find yourself in an area you can't climb out of. Get soft-locked because there's a strong enemy in your way and you have no means to fight them. Or you've taken enough damage to the head that your vision is blurred. You're in a dark sewer, and you have no idea how to make it back out. It's your responsibility to decide when to give up and load back a save. Because there were plenty of times that I felt hopeless, that I'd back myself into a corner with no way out. But I persevered, and clawed my way out of some pretty bad situations, and let me tell you, that's not a feeling I've gotten from a game in a really, really long time. It is so rewarding to be convinced that you're screwed, only to outsmart or outmaneuver your situation and come out on top. This is somewhat mitigated by being able to save at any time, barring one level, which we'll get to later, but ultimately, this game rewards exploration and player initiative extremely well. And there's some pretty insane attention to detail, like getting lit up when you fire your gun. Now, Peripeteia is an immersive sim, and if you're familiar with immersive sims, you might be thinking, yeah, well, no shit, Sherlock, that's kind of what makes this genre. And you're right. For those unfamiliar, immersive sims are games that put more emphasis on player choice, relying more on systems rather than structures. It allows the player to make more free choices, solving problems in ways that the developers themselves might not think of. Now, I was going to say that the only immersive sim I'd played prior to Peripeteia was the first 2 levels of Deus Ex, but upon looking up other games in the genre, I found out that Thief, System Shock, BioShock, and Hitman are considered immersive sims. Games that I had played. But even compared to those games, Peripeteia's sense of freedom feels a great deal more vast. You could play any of the 5 levels that are available for hours and hours, still find new pathways, characters, locations, and items. But it's because of this that I think this game is not going to be loved by everyone. I can easily see how someone could view this game as wasting their time. Objectives have a lot of dead space between them. There's minimal quality of life mechanics, and there's plenty of places to get frustrated because it feels like the game let you dig yourself into a hole. But I think that's just the trade-off for having the amount of freedom Peripeteia offers. As soon as you implement anything to prevent the player from straying too far, you lose that sense of adventure. And that's not to say I don't think there isn't areas in the game that could be polished up some. It is early access, after all. Like, because the game lets you go anywhere, you can find yourself in areas that you're obviously not supposed to be. You know, missing textures, clipping geometry, you know the deal. And some of this freedom does come at a cost of the story, which we'll talk about later. So, obviously, this level serves as our introduction to the game. Because of this, I've found it's a little more structured in level design than the ones after it. It's a little harder to become lost, there's pathways that seem intentional, and there's pretty much a singular objective. From what I can tell, this level serves as a replacement for the one that we got in the demo that we covered a couple years ago. The city's a little different this time around, but there's still some similarities, as you'll see. Sukin Sin wakes up in... Huh? What?
Her name isn't Sukin Sin.
What?
It's not Sukin Sin.
What do you mean?
Her name is Marie. Sukin Sin means son of a bitch in Polish.
It means what?
It's son of a bitch in Polish.
Oh. So, seems I have another mistake to correct for, her name's not Sukin Sin, it's Marie. As it turns out, that bartender in the demo was exclaiming, son of a bitch, in Polish. Which means, throughout that original video I made, I was calling her, Suki-san? Are you alright? Oops. Anyway, Marie wakes up in what looks like a dump, and Jesus, guys. How am I meant to concentrate with these saucy images popping up? You'll find a note on the table letting you know that someone was in the middle of being salvaged, and a little tutorial on how to use your augmentations. By default, you'll have night vision, enhanced movement, and a scouting drone. And pro tip, use the drone! I underutilized this thing so much, but while I was doing a second playthrough, I found that this thing helped in both exploration and planning attacks a lot. So when you play this, use your drone. As you emerge from the junk heap, you'll run into Philemon, a junker and a bartender. Turns out, he's the guy that was salvaging you. He asks Marie if she remembers anything, which doesn't seem to be much, only vague memories of falling and a bunker. We learn through him that you're a cyborg, and thankfully for us, he can't bring himself to scrap live cyborgs. So he agrees to let us go, and if we do him a favor, he'll get us a train ticket and some names that might point us towards this bunker, which, according to him, has a good chance of not even existing. He asks us to go to a planetarium and retrieve a light bulb from a star projector there. Seems the PSR, or Polish Solidarity Republic, the closest thing to the government in this world, really wants to reopen this planetarium. He says the light bulbs for it aren't made anymore, so if you get it for him, he'll be able to sell it back to the PSR for a hiked up price, making back what he lost by not being able to salvage you. Problem is, you'll need to fight some subculturalists that are squatting there to get to it. So he lets you pick an additional augmentation for Marie, as well as a starting weapon. So pretty much the same setup as the first level of the demo. Wake up, talk to bartender, get things from outlaws for a bartender, get on train. And there's even a subterranean priest like in the demo. I won't really go too much into the storyline from here, since again, a lot of the charm of this game is finding your way through it, including the story. So I'll be keeping it vague from now on. We will return to the story later though. But for this game, I think it's a perfect introduction for what's to come. There's enough structure here that I think anybody should be able to make their way through without much issue, but still a ton of out-of-the-way areas to explore. Like the skate park, and this dude that's going on about spirit medium girls or something. Anyway, despite being the first level, there's plenty to explore and see. There's Philemon's bar, the rooftops, rooftop garden, apartment complexes, PSR office, which, by the way, you can choose to report Philemon for attempting to scam the PSR if you really want to. The aforementioned skate park, a radio tower, the planetarium, and the abandoned mall. Weirdly enough, even though later levels have stuff like towns, museums, cityscapes, and nightclubs, I think this first level feels the most lived in. I mean, all the levels at the moment have very minimal populations. You'll mostly be running into PSR soldiers or communist insurgents. But I hope in the future we'll get to see some more civilians and unaligned agents. I don't know if it's because it's the first level, so it's had more time in the oven, but there's at least one unique civilian here, and the inclusion of apartment complexes in the mall, abandoned as it may seem, helps give it a much more residential feel. It's friendly, which I guess is to be expected from a tutorial.
Where will it be today?
Okay, maybe not that. At the moment, this level feels like the smallest of the 5 available. It's not bad, but there's not much to see compared to the others. As soon as you arrive in this level station, you can talk to this guard who seems pretty hostile towards you. He makes comments about Marie's eyes and how they're freaking him out. The guy says he's a Byelorussian, which I had to look up, and seems to view the PSR unfavorably. Based on his dialogue, it's pretty safe to say this area is less hospitable towards Poles, or at the very least, the PSR and their supporters. This level's got a bar, a sewer you can explore, some streets with an ongoing conflict, and a local mobster's penthouse. The sewer and the lead up to the penthouse are probably the most interesting parts of this level. There's not much to do on the street other than watch people get shot, and the bar's pretty small, so most of your activity will be down in those sewers or up in the penthouse. It does kind of feel like you leave this level as soon as you enter it, but still, it's a good time. There's a pretty interesting villain, should you choose to talk to him. You can see much more of the game's conflict of power in this level, as both the PSR and members of a group known as the Second Union are present in the area. There's this PSR guy, you can have a nice chat about the concrete jungle before you, as well as this other one that got stuck with a dog shit AK. I'm not even making that up, the game calls it a dog shit AK. And it wasn't lying, this thing is fucking awful. It's so bad that if you try and sell it at a store, you have to pay them to take it. This level I'd say was the most fun to explore. There's a lot of unused space, however, so there's a lot of downtime between locations. There's the train station at the start, a bar, some apartments, a crematorium, some abandoned buildings with violent homeless people residing inside, the war-torn streets, a cultist tower, beach, reactor tower, and a mill. Already, you can feel the areas becoming more violent. There's a lot more people that are going to start shooting at you in this level, as well as tanks patrolling the streets. And let me just say, god damn, these guys need some better tanks. I took out 2 of these things with just a saber. Oh yeah, there's also this reactor tower that you can screw with if you so choose, which led to this really persistent helicopter following me around for the rest of my time in that level. It is a very vertical level, so Marie's enhanced movement augmentation will come in handy a lot here. You will be going through a lot of batteries though. And, oh yeah, the batteries. So there's these 2 meters at the bottom that show Marie's health and her energy. The energy is consumed when you have any of the augmentations enabled. There are some that don't use energy, like this one that lets you dual wield weapons, but for the most part they all use some amount of energy. I found that you can refill them in one of 3 ways. You can use these energy fuses, which permanently restore energy until you use it again. You can use large batteries, which will restore some power, but drain over time, even when you're not using anything. There's small batteries too, and the principle's the same, but it applies to your health instead. I find it kind of weird that the size of the battery determines its effect on you. I think having some kind of other difference, like, I don't know, alkaline or lithium, something like that. But 3, smoking. Yes, smoking a cigarette, ciga blunt restores Marie's energy. If you find one of these in a level, grab it, because as far as I can tell, this thing never runs out. So it's just an unlimited source of energy. Damn, maybe the solution to the energy crisis was tobacco and tar. Belgrade! Belgrade! Belgrade. It's kind of hard to describe this level. It starts off with the train Marie's in crashing. She wakes up a while later and tries to climb down a nearby tower to get back to street level. It seems there's more to this tower than meets the eye though. There's a school, artillery line, a prison, a theater, another tower. whatever this is. Yeah, Belgrade is probably the most confusing level in the game at the moment, both from a story and navigation standpoint, especially with there being various places that teleport you to other parts of the map. This level is also the only one where you can't save whenever you want. Marie will either express that she feels calm or unsafe. You can only save when she expresses the former. I think this level goes more into Marie's past, but honestly this level's story was harder to follow than any of the others. It's also arguably the hardest level in the game, as there's plenty of places you can fall off the tower, as well as having these wardens as enemies, and yeah, you're basically screwed if these guys spot you. They share Marie's ability of enhanced movement, and can catch up to you in an instant if you're not using Marie's augmentations effectively. Also, it didn't help that I didn't spot this Makarov near the beginning of the level until like my 9th or 10th try. And if you're going to engage these wardens, aim high, because they still only take one shot if it's to the head. There's also these doll enemies. They're pretty strong, but not as much as the wardens. They can attack you pretty rapidly, but they're also not very smart, so you can trick a lot of them into throwing themselves off the tower. In a lot of ways, it's the coolest level. There's much more experimentation going on in terms of level structure, and the implications I got story-wise make me want to go back to that level in particular and dig a little deeper. But it's also the most frustrating. Wardens aside, there's significantly less means to defend yourself in this level compared to the first 3. I noticed there's more places you can get stuck here too, with no feasible way to get back, which normally wouldn't be an issue, but because you can only save at certain points now, you end up backtracking a lot more. And this level has some leaps of faith with no way to tell which pits kill you and which ones take you to the meaty flesh prison, which again wouldn't be so frustrating if you could save whenever you like. Though, I don't think you should have to rely on the player saving, so maybe just some visual distinction like a deep red liquid or something. So it's still dark from a distance, but it lets you know it's safe as you get closer. It was, despite the frustrations, very rewarding once I finished it. See, there's this last encounter in the level, and I would always run out of ammo before I could finish the fight. I thought I was going to have to restart the level from scratch and be more conservative with my ammo, but instead of giving up and starting over, I searched for over an hour, checking every nook and cranny for a little extra ammo, and managed to scrounge up just enough to finish the encounter. That was probably the most gratifying moment of my playthrough. Okay, thankfully, no more flesh pits with this one. Well, maybe except for that one. This is currently the last level of the game, and I think the biggest in terms of sheer size out of the 5, though with less to see than the chasm. There's actually 3 separate regions to this level, requiring a train to go between them. For the start of the level, you're stuck until you can find a way to get the trains going again. According to a guard, the trains aren't actually operated manually, they're on some sort of algorithm. This first region has a nightclub, a waterworks, some apartments, an underground shopping area, and the Dream Fountain, home to these 2 cringe-ass spirit mediums. And this dude that's going on about spirit medium girls or something? Anyway. Oh hey, what do you know? Yeah, these 2 are certified anime dweebs. They get on Marie's nerves enough that she says the gamer word to them. This area is probably the closest to the tutorial with feeling lived in. It's the only time we see a large amount of civilians in one place, and also the apartments in this area don't look completely cramped. Once the train's moving, the second region has a small town, a library, a cafe, PSR office, and museum. You can chat to this goth chick at the cafe about the town, and this weirdo who's obsessed with Joseph Stalin's bloodline. Despite being a town, there's not really much to see here. There's this German guy. He's got the largest selection of augmentations in the entire game. I I don't think this guy's as nice as Philemon. Then the third region has a big PSR building with a lab, bar, seems to be a lot of those, church, some living quarters, and an absolutely massive graveyard. This part, weirdly enough, I think is the most refined part of the game. You're given a pretty clear task with pretty clear choices. There are things in place to prevent you from doing things out of order, and the game even forces you to a certain part of the building once you're needed. Honestly, it was kind of jarring having the game going from being really loose to really structured for this particular area. Oops, did I say 5 levels? There's actually 6 levels. Well, technically there's 8, but 2 of those are test levels. They don't count. In between each map, you get to visit Marie's apartment, which I'm unsure how she would remember an apartment to go back to, considering she has amnesia. I'm sure that'll be explained with updates, but anyway. This serves as a little reprieve, as well as your stage select. And this stage contains Marie's 2 bestest of friends, Succulent and Hallway Weirdo. Her name's Kasia, or at least I think it is. I swear to God, if this means something like bullshit in Polish, I'm gonna lose my mind. After each stage that you complete, Marie will return to her apartment, and you'll have new interactions with both her Succulent and Kasia. Why can't she talk to me that way? It should have been me! As weird as it sounds, I don't really want to spoil the interactions between these two. It's a small thing, but it's nice to see what happens after each level. Though I will say, hotels all across the land probably hate this woman. So, what can I say about the story? Well, for one, it's important to remember that this game isn't a finished product yet. I ended up playing through the game twice, mainly because the story made absolutely no sense my first time around, which was partially my fault. My second time around was a lot clearer, though I still felt it was a bit hard to follow at times. The story as it is right now is relatively self-contained to the level you're in, and the overall story doesn't seem to matter as much as the themes, which, from my understanding, are as follows. The first level, Tutorial, is all about getting you familiar with the game, and just establishing the world you're in. The second, Memorial Tower, is about corruption and manipulation, and how power can change people. The third, The Chasm, is a question of whether changing a somewhat comfortable status quo in exchange for unpredictable disruption is worth it. The fourth, Belgrade, is probably the most confusing, but it seems to be a more personal tale. I won't say much on this one because I think it has the most to explore and discover, and I'd also be talking out of my ass. And finally, the fifth, Karabash, is about clashing beliefs and ideologies, how there's not necessarily a right or wrong, and how picking a side, or even not picking one at all, will still have its tragedies. At least that's how I interpreted them. I think different people will pull different meanings behind each level, which is most likely the point. And even in playing it twice, there's still quest lines I know I didn't finish. At the moment, there doesn't seem to be many overarching threads, the only ones being Marie's search for this bunker, and the power struggle between the PSR and Second Union. The PSR, or Polish Solidarity Republic, is a body that filled the vacuum after whatever power held Poland got destroyed or disbanded. For all intents and purposes, they seem to be the closest thing to a government. They're who you'll see keeping the peace most of the time. According to Philemon at the start, they don't seem to be operating very efficiently, causing skepticism on whether they're sustainable or not, with a lot of internal power struggles on top of their external ones. The Second Union, the other faction in the game, appears to be the revival of the USSR. It seems at some point before the events of the game, Moscow was bombed, with some communists taking refuge in bunkers. From these bunkers, they kept radio broadcasts going, and at some point started leaving the bunkers to form the Second Union. The current climate now is the PSR being very disjointed and unfocused, leaving people uncertain if they're a reliable leader. And the Second Union, being a more focused group, with a better chance of actually rebuilding, at the cost of falling back under communist power. All the while, smaller groups are beginning to form, Groups neither the PSR or Second Union want to get any bigger, since that would lead to more opposition of either takeover. And if I sound confused by all this, it's because I am. I think part of why I found the story so hard to follow is because I'm not well versed on East European history, communist history outside of Karl Marx or Joseph Stalin, or how much the Cold War affected Poland. I take it that this game references to a lot of real-world events, ones that I'm ignorant to. But in a way, I think it complemented the game, since I felt just as lost narratively as I did spatially, which also helped in relating to Marie, since it's stated that she has amnesia. While there's dialogue options that show that she does hold some understanding of the world's history, I imagine she largely feels lost in this world, likely not understanding too much of the events leading up to Poland's current state. Now, we're at a bit of a catch-22. Up until now, I've pretty much been singing this game's praises, and for good reason. I think this game has a brilliant foundation, and one not everyone will love, but one that actually feels unique to play. And if you give it your patience and time, you'll be rewarded. Unless you're trying to follow this story. See, with this second playthrough, I've recognized that I need to stick to certain paths if the story is to play out in order. But to do that, I need to self-impose a limit on enjoying pretty much the best part of the game, the exploration. Again, getting lost and finding these different places I'm not sure I'm supposed to be in yet was a highlight of my first playthrough. So having to give that up for the story, or vice versa, just feels like a shame. It did, evidently, encourage me to play the game again to get more of the story. But I can definitely see people picking this game up, playing like how I did the first go around, and feeling like the story is lacking or not there. And the thing is, I can't really think of a way the devs could polish this up going forward without some kind of drawback. Again, it's a catch-22. You can't start guiding players towards the story more, because that'll just ruin one of the best parts of the game. But obviously you can't have the story adapt completely to the player's actions and order, since I can imagine that would require programming triggers upon triggers upon triggers. I'm sure this is something that's going to be balanced out as the game gets developed, but personally, I hope it errs on the side of less restrictions with the risk of breaking, rather than too restrictive and taking away the charm of the game. Just know, in the game's current state, you can do things out of order, leading to Marie's actions being really questionable and confusing. Like for instance, I sabotaged this reactor by installing some kind of virus. No one told me to do it, I just found this area by exploring, and when I saw the option to install the virus, I took it. Afterwards, I was able to end the mission through this woman in the mill, with no context of why that completed the mission. You're also able to cross between quest lines that I don't think are supposed to be crossed. Like here, where I was able to talk to a commissar of the Second Union, while being aligned with the PSR, meaning I was on hostile terms with the Second Union, and the guy even, after the dialogue, shot me. This issue definitely varies between levels. It seems at its worst in the Chasm and Karabash, which makes sense as they're the two biggest levels at the moment. And with Karabash, you technically don't need the train. If you have enough patience, you can walk the whole way, but you'll be skipping whole story beats by doing this. I'm looking forward to the story getting expanded and refined. It feels more nuanced and gray compared to a lot of other dystopian settings, and it's pointed out a hole in my education, so now I'm curious to learn more about East European history and politics. Again, this game's still pretty early in development, so let's let them cook. This game, I believe, has incredible potential to become one of those games. You know, the type that sticks around for a long time. Think Skyrim or Team Fortress 2. Just any game that seems to stick in people's conscience for a long time. So, I've made a little wish list of things that I hope are realistic enough to be implemented as the game gets closer to its final state. Firstly, mod support. Given the game's open nature, I can see there being a big community of custom maps, weapons, augmentations, and game mechanics. Again, this game's foundation is extremely good, so opening it up to modding, I think, could lead to some pretty amazing stuff. Secondly, a gun quality mechanic, and more dynamic AI. There's no shortage of guns in Peripeteia, which in some instances led to encounters feeling quite easy, barring Belgrade. I think this could be fixed with the implementation of a couple mechanics, since I think just decreasing the gun count in the world would go against the setting that this game's going for. Instead, have not every gun be equal. We already have the dogshit AK, so why not also a shit AK, or a okay AK, and a good AK, and well-kept AKs? I don't think it needs to be too complicated. Even just having lower quality or ill-kept guns misfire occasionally to waste your ammo and give away your position, or jam and need a couple seconds to clear the chamber, I reckon could go a long way. It would also incentivize using the merchants more, since they could offer better maintained weapons. Or maybe even a service to clean and repair worse ones, because at the moment the merchants are really only good for augmentations and healing items. Also, the AI at the moment lacks any semblance of self-preservation. Once they've spotted you, they'll just run at you. I think adding occasional zigzag run patterns if they're in the player's cone of vision, or if an ally is within a certain distance and they're not already joined with a different ally, they try and close the gap between each other and stay together. I think even having them start to move away from the player instead of towards them when their health goes down to a certain level would be good. I'm not a programmer, keep in mind, so I have no idea how realistic this is to implement. But those are two solutions I imagine wouldn't be impossible to put in place. Third, persistent inventory and journal. So with the inventory, I'm pretty sure this is the plan already, since at the start of Belgrade, Marie mentions that her stuff is missing. But at the moment, your inventory and journal entries don't carry over from level to level. This one's pretty self-explanatory. I just think it would be beneficial to be able to read the previous journal entries of past levels, which I think would also help with story cohesion later down the line. Of course, having them in submenus, and maybe a different color than the journal entries from the level you're currently in to prevent the player from getting confused would be good too. Fourth, specified save areas. So, the game already does this in Belgrade. There's only certain areas where the game will let you save. But at first, I didn't realize that this was a mechanic. I just thought Belgrade had to be done in one go. The only reason I realized was because I attempted to quick save for the first time, and saw a message telling me to get Marie to a safe area first. There's these messages that pop up in the corner to tell you when Marie doesn't and does feel safe, but I didn't realize that meant can't save and save. I think the best solution to this is just making that a consistent part of the game. They don't have to be as sparse as in Belgrade, but let's say take the first level, tutorial. So Philemon's bar, the PSR office, the apartments, and the underground church after killing the subculturalists invading it could become save areas. This would do two things in my mind. It would, one, make exploration a little more daring, since in every map other than Belgrade, you can just save before doing something risky. And if it doesn't work out, you can load the save and get away scot-free. While I love how accommodating this game is to exploration, I think having some kind of punishment for doing risky actions would make things a little more interesting. And two, it would make Belgrade a little less jarring once you get up to it. You would have already learned that you can only save in certain areas, so you could save the frustration of some players by establishing that beforehand. That, hey, you can only save in certain areas. For the fifth, Marie's limbs have more impact on gameplay. For the moment, it seems only the legs and the head have much of an effect on gameplay. She'll walk slower as her legs get hurt, and her vision gets more blurry as she takes damage to the head. I think introducing more negative effects would not only make this damage system more interesting, but it would also go back to the second thing on the wish list, which is for encounters to be more dynamic. Accentuating her limp when her legs get hurt, recoil and accuracy becoming worse as your arms are damaged. Might be a bit extreme, but to have one side of the screen go dark upon taking damage to an eye would be pretty cool. And finally, something we already talked about. Retaining the game's crazy sense of exploration. The reason I put this last is because I have no logical way this would happen. At least not without an impossible amount of programming. But I know, as this game moves along the pipeline, and things are put in place to prevent playing quest lines out of order, or crossing two concurrent lines that shouldn't be concurrent, there's going to have to be some sacrifice to the player's agency. Well, yes, it was weird to install a virus in a reactor for no reason, and then have this random woman and Marie chat like they've planned this in advance. It was also fun. Even though my first playthrough left me in the dark a lot with how far I wandered off and got myself out of order, it was fun to find real things to do. Not just flavor text or some extra ammo. Stuff I wasn't supposed to do yet. Again, I don't think there's a realistic way for this game to move forward and fix story inconsistencies, while also letting the player find parts of other quest lines and have it make sense. Well, this is a wish list after all, not a needs to be in the game list. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure this game will still be stellar once the storylines and structure are refined and complete. I just hope some of that early development magic can make its way to the final product. I hope to stream this game on occasion. Maybe during major updates we'll boot it up and explore. If you're at all interested after this video, I highly encourage you to pick it up for yourself. I think this game will prove to be pretty special. Well, I think it's about time I wrap this video up. I've got a date with this Polish girl I met a couple days ago. She's got these beautiful glowing eyes like you wouldn't believe. It's almost unnatural. Alright, well, have a good night everyone.
Hey, baby. Are you a Soviet-era car? Because you're stalling my engine. Oh, jeez, that's awful. Okay, no. Hey, beautiful. I'd let you redistribute my wealth any day. Nah. You know, if this date works out and we're a good match, maybe in the future we'll call our kids Euro-Asia. No, creepy. That's too creepy. Hey girl, you keep staring at me like that. My face will be the bottom half of your flag. Nah, too meek. Don't be afraid to hurt me, baby. You've already made your marks.